Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is Sergio Arellano, a veteran of the U.S. Army who was injured in service to our nation. Since returning to civilian life, he has been very active in veterans' causes, and he's now a candidate for Congress in Arizona. And Sergio, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Where were you born and raised? Let's start there.
I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay.
I'm a first-generation American. My parents are from Sonora, Mexico.
Excellent. So big Wildcat fan, I'm guessing.
Big time. We can't wait for the game tonight.
I bet. You got a great team this year. So you enlisted in the Army at 17, correct?
I did, 17 and a half years old.
Why did you do that?
I have no idea. I mean, it was weird. I was attending a vocational school. My plan was to go to college and do computer-aided drafting or something to do with video games. And out of the blue, I ended up talking to a recruiter, unbeknownst to me that he was going to chase me for another year. And so a day came when I got a phone call from my mother. I had just gotten off of school, and she says, Sergio, get over here now. There's a big black dude pounding on my door and yelling your name. And so I'm freaked out, like, what the heck is going on? So I call another friend, and I said, man, hurry up. Meet me back in the barrio, right? Go back. I'll meet you at the house and let's see what the hell's going on. My mom wouldn't call me unless it was something like that. And so we get there. The door's open to the trailer where we used to live in. And I rush in expecting the worst, right? And we live in the south side, a poor neighborhood of Tucson. And walk in, and my mom is sitting there having coffee with a guy by the name of Sergeant Harding. And he was the recruiter that's been chasing me for X amount of years.
And so he convinced you and your mom, it sounds like.
Pretty much. My mom was a very wise woman and saw that there weren't really many jobs, there weren't many opportunities in the neighborhood where we grew up. And she was a big proponent of me actually going to a vocational school. It was Fred G. Acosta Job Corps. And so I learned some trades there. I learned business and management. I learned retail sales. And I always wanted to be an entrepreneur deep down inside of me. And when the time came, she said, the Army is a good opportunity for you. And she signed right away, signed my rights away. And so then...
She had to because you weren't 18 yet,
Most
right?
definitely, mm-hmm. Yes. And so when I told my dad about it, he was very against it. He is very Mexican. He's like, why would you fight for those people? And you shouldn't join the military. And so it was a little contrast, a little fighting between my mother and my father. But at the end of the day, it was what I wanted. And he made a good point, a good selling point, right? We want free college, we want education, and we want a place to live and meals and everything else.
You've described your neighborhood a couple times now. Go into a little more detail about that, the area where you grew up.
Okay, the area where I grew up is the south side of Tucson, and that's mainly a Hispanic demographic. A lot of people have migrated down there, and not many people really make it to college or make it into a work life. People get distracted, they don't finish school, they drop out, they want to provide for their families. You see a lot of first-generation families there, generation Americans or immigrant families from where we come from. So it's really rare that you have people be successful in that environment. And so, it's something that continues to be true to this very day. And I think it's indicative of the lack of people we have willing to stand up and make a difference.
So what year was it that you enlisted?
I enlisted April 4th of 2001.
You probably didn't have too much of an idea of what was going to happen less than 6 months later.
I did not have the remote idea. I really didn't know what the military was. I knew that we wanted a change in a different career path. We wanted to make something of ourselves. So when I went to the MEPS Center to qualify for a job, I went through a whole list of things that they offered. They said, you can be explosive ordnance disposal. We have military police officer. We have combat engineer. We have, I think it was maintenance. We have a mechanic. We have a driver. And they said, but there's this job here that has a $6,000 bonus. And so I'm like, well, what is that job? And they said, oh, it's infantry. And I said, well, what's infantry? And the lady at the counter said, oh, it's a slightly harder basic training, but you get to play with guns. And being a little 17-year-old kid from the South Side, and you're paying them $6,000 plus you get to play with guns and legally, I said, sign me right up. And I signed up, went back home, and was telling a couple friends in the neighborhood, yeah, I just joined the Army. And they were asking me, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to be infantry. And one of my friends picks up and says, Sergio, infantry goes to war, right? And I'm like, really? I didn't know that. I thought I was just going to go play with guns and get a bonus and go to school. And so I get on the phone and I call back to the recruiter and I said, hey, is it true that I'm going to war? And he says, oh, no, don't worry about that. Desert Storm's been over, since the 90s, late 90s, where we don't foresee a war coming up in the future, any conflicts or anything else. Unbeknownst to me that as I'm graduating basic training, the World Trade Center hits. And so...
How did that change the plan for you?
I still didn't know what was going on initially. When you're going through basic training and you're in the infantry course and you're going through everything, they begin to drill into you that you're a combat guy. What makes the green grass grow? Blood, blood, bright red blood. Or you're stabbing. Every time you stab a tire, you yell kill. And so you're being conditioned for war. It isn't really a reality, as you're training. You just think it's part of a regular basic training. And so... it's interesting because I did my final training exercise on a fractured foot because of the stresses and all the weight we had to carry. I was only like 110 pounds soaking wet when I joined. I was on double rations, which is good for me because I got to eat extra, but I was still underweight. And so I had a fractured foot, and we made it through with Motrin, and so I was at the hospital at the time. And I'm a big joker, and so when I saw a plane crashed into a building and it was on the TV news, I was at the chow hall waiting in line to get my food, and I said, oh my gosh, that guy's stupid. How do you not see a building right in front of you? You're pretty dumb. And then the second plane hits, and then there's talks about reports that other planes got hijacked and that it's a terrorist attack. So they immediately send us to our unit. The drill sergeant busts in, kicks the door in, and he yells, we're going to war, mother effers. Right? And so that kind of wakes you up. And you're saying, holy crap, I was just told I'm not going to war. And then you have a drill sergeant who's been with you the whole time saying you're going to war. And it was surreal. It was still surreal learning that I might eventually go to a conflict.
Where did you go from there once you were done with the infantry course?
So from Fort Benning, Georgia, I went to Fort Irwin, California. And that's where we did, at Fort Benning, Georgia, they put us into the MOUT training, which is the urban, clear the building type stuff. Okay. And then they sent us to Fort Irwin, California for desert and extreme hot weather training. Then we found ourselves deploying out of Fort Riley, Kansas with the 1st and the 16th Infantry Division.
And where did you go?
So at Fort Riley, Kansas, we trained... all this training, so I graduated it was around November, right? December, we ended up getting to our unit finally. And then the training took place for 2 years. Then it still wasn't real to me. We're just training, we're going to training. And September of 2003 is 2 years basically from when the World Trade Center was attacked. September of 2003, we're on a flight to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom.
And where do they put your unit?
So, we go to Kuwait and do the staging and everything else. During this time, the conflict's already going on. Baghdad was taken by U.S. forces. And then we ended up following up and going to Ramadi, Iraq. So when you hear about the fight for Fallujah, back in '03, when you saw on the news the fight for Fallujah, Ramadi, Habaniya, we were in every single one of those conflicts with the 1st and the 16th Infantry Division.
We'll get into this a little bit more in the next segment. We've only got about a minute. What was your mindset as you prepared for combat the first time? You mentioned how in the training they prepared you for it, but it didn't seem like it was ever actually going to happen. When you realized this is really going to happen, what are you thinking?
It was still surreal. It was still surreal up until the moment that I was in Kuwait, staging for deployment.
Wow. And so when you actually were deployed to these places, Ramadi, Fallujah, and you're seeing the enemy, are all the instincts or all the training kicking in? Or is there a lot of different things flying through your mind?
In Kuwait, I had something just hit me, and I was scared. Because when you watch movies and when you watch TV, you got these places like Black Hawk Down, you fly in, and you're in the middle of combat. You have, I was expecting full-on firefight from the moment we hit the ground. And so I really was scared. It was to the point where one of my sergeants came up and said, "Are you now a conscientious objector?" Because I shared my concerns. I really felt scared at the time. And it's not easy to share that, especially in an all-male infantry unit. But I confidentially told my sergeant, and he flipped out on me. And so we doubled down, went there, and at that moment, we landed in Ramadi. We had basically secured an old school, and we ended up living out of there.
Sergio, let's pause right there. When we come back, much more of your story from Iraq and following on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined in studio today by Sergio Arellano. He is a veteran of the U.S. Army, injured in service to our country, now very active in veterans causes, and also a congressional candidate. We'll get to all of that in a little bit. But Sergio, we left off with you struggling with the idea that you were about to engage the enemy in combat. Eventually, as you put it, you doubled down, you deployed. Explain what that first encounter with the enemy was like.
Well, not a first encounter with the enemy, but we flew in at night. Mm-hmm. I remember it was all a night operation, so we waited until it was dark, flew in Apache helicopters, and landed. Then we had a convoy of Humvees come pick us up and take us to our staging location, basically where we were going to set up. And so we ended up in Ramadi, in an abandoned schoolhouse, no running water, no light, no electricity. There was basically nothing. You're basically camping out as if you were in a training session, right? In a deployment. And so the experience wasn't what I expected. I expected a full-on firefight as we landed and came in, but it wasn't that. We actually got in, we got settled, and then we set up our living area, and everybody claimed a little corner of the room and this abandoned school building, and we rolled out our sleeping bags, and this is my corner, stay away.
Then what?
Well, then I'll tell you that the most interesting thing happened. I was asleep, and then all of a sudden I thought it was the 4th of July. And at night, all you had were mortar attacks coming in from around the compound. So you jolt and you wake up to a big loud boom. And then boom, 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 and it's repetitive. And it continues throughout the entire night. And it's people outside of the compound that we've secured lobbying mortars, trying to hit American troops. And we did suffer casualties while we were there because of these mortar strikes. I remember one of our captains, a mortar landed basically in the middle of our living area. And there was shrapnel thrown all over the place. Shrapnel literally traveled through a window into where one of the captains was filling out paperwork that pierced his head. And he died instantly from that attack. Not only that, but our bathrooms are also out there. So you generally don't want to go to the bathroom at night for fear that you'll probably catch a mortar attack while you're out there.
Wow.
And so it's very impacting to see a life lost, especially one a friendly that's out there with you, one who you've deployed with and trained with, and it's just wow. You just can't explain it. There's just a particular smell in the air. Some say you can smell death in the air. It's a smell you won't forget. Anything like that.
How do you process that and keep doing your job?
I talk about it. I've actually been able to process it by talking a lot about it, especially with vet organizations and people you can talk to. But I carried that around with me for a very long time, and it was really harsh. It was transitioning back. Transitioning back is very difficult for us when you see a lot of stuff. I didn't used to stop for red lights out there for fear that we'd get an IED blast or get assaulted or, the insurgents would try and attack us. And so when I came back, I just blew through every red light I could for that same reason. It's just the mentality. And it's not because I did it on purpose, but it's just that's how you become programmed. It's fight or flight, right? And so you got to be able to maintain alertness and also constantly moving so you can come back alive.
Did you get a lot of tickets, or did the police show a little grace there?
Yeah, most definitely. Go look at my driving. I have about 15 tickets, and not proud of it, but, it's just the way you're programmed, and you come back and you have to readjust. And so...
Sergio, you mentioned that you expected this wall-to-wall firefight when you got to some of these cities, and you said it wasn't like that. So what was it like?
Well, I'll tell you, in the first, like I said, when I first got to Ramadi, then we started doing patrols out in sector, and it seemed like every single patrol was a fight. There was either a conflict, or there was an arrest, or there was a search of a house, and it was basically keeping us safe. I mean, there would be times when we would go into a little village on the outskirts of where we're at, and people would be looking at us. Some would wave, and then some would be hostile. And so we were working off of intelligence, where we would kind of know where the potential troublemakers were, and then when we received a hostile response, then we kind of knew something was up. So we'd search households, or we would check themselves and perform patrols. And on more than one occasion, we actually found weapon stashes in several households. Rocket-propelled grenades, hand grenades, AK-47s, money. I mean, it was just outrageous, the level of anti-American sentiment was out there. We were there to actually help build, not only to keep America safe, but we also did a lot for schools and for kids and bring back water. We did a lot of things for a community that saw oppression under Saddam Hussein's rule. And the way that we were being treated and the response to us was I don't know, it's just a different experience. And I get it. We're in their land and we're occupying their territory. But at the same time, when we're not there, they're being taken over by even more hostile forces.
Sergio, let's pause right there. We'll take one more break and be right back with the rest of your story on Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. This is the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Corombos. Thanks for being with us. Happy to be joined in studio today by U.S. Army veteran Sergio Arellano. He is also very active in veterans causes and is a congressional candidate in Arizona, all of which we hope to get to in this segment. And Sergio, we were just talking about the distrust that the people that you were patrolling, those neighbors that you were patrolling, they just didn't trust you. As time went on and they saw what you were doing, did that tend to thaw a little bit, or was the distrust constant the whole time you were there?
I'll tell you, we expected things to thaw, but the same people that are coming out, here's what made this place very difficult, is you had the same very people that were coming up to you, that were giving you a thumbs up, that same kid that you handed a soccer ball to or some rations to, those same people would turn around and in most cases, in a different time, they would be the same people that are planning these IEDs, these improved explosive devices. These are the same people trying to get close to you to feed intel to the ones, that are trying to cause the most harm to you out there. So it was a constant. You couldn't trust anybody. At least in some wars in history, you knew who the enemy was. But in this situation, you didn't. They were so crafty. And so even if they did warm up to you, you had to doubt that it was genuine. And there were several instances and cases where we caught people that would hang out with us or say hi or give us a thumbs up. And it turned out to be that they were the ones planning the bombs, expecting us to turn up in a certain area. And so it was hard to deal with that.
Yeah, you think you've got some loyalty there, and then all of a sudden it's the exact opposite.
Most definitely.
Depending on the situation. So were you able to develop a system to sift the fakes from the ones who were legitimately glad you were there?
No, there really isn't a system to develop.
Okay.
I mean, if they get nervous or jittery when you ask them more than certain questions, it's more than a certain amount of questions, then yeah, you can tell something's up. We'll refer it to our translator. Normally the translators have an in to that community so they can help point things out. But at the end of the day, nobody ever knew. And you would never know.
How long were you in Iraq?
Geez. From September of 2003 to the end of December of 2004. So
over a year.
Yeah, we were stop loss there. I mean, we were frozen. It's at the height of the combat war. We've now surpassed Iraqi freedom. Now we're in the enduring freedom phase. We had trips to Fallujah and Habaniya, and we were in skirmishes the whole step of the way there. And so it wasn't an all-out battle. It would just be you're driving, boom, you hear an explosion or you hear gunfire, and then you begin to either return fire, or you continue driving as fast as you can. It all depends on the situation. And so I think one of the biggest conflicts that we did encounter was the Fallujah Fight. We had so many casualties out there, and I lost a few friends as well in Fallujah. And it was just a different world, man. You're trying to permeate a stronghold, right, for the opposition. And they had people set up in the outskirts, just either sniping or providing resistance. It was just, it was a difficult time.
Were most of them natives, or were you dealing with a lot of AQI at that point?
AQI, natives, the Sunni, the
sectarian.
Yeah, the Sunnis were jumping in. It was all kinds of people. It was really weird. It got to a point where we started seeing, another demographic come in. I really couldn't tell you who it was. We just know that things changed. Tactics change as well.
How were you injured?
So I was in an IED blast. One of my sergeants actually lost his full front of his mouth. It was just crazy. I was bucked off the Humvee, and I landed on my back, and kind of like my neck area. So I was bucked forward, and so I still have injuries, back injuries and mild traumatic brain injury and tinnitus and stuff from an IED blast that I was involved in. Lost consciousness for a bit. I didn't know what the heck was going on or what was happening. And so we ended up losing a soldier, and one of sergeants and stuff got injured and things like that. It's very hazy for me now. There are a lot of things that I wish I could remember about Iraq and the conflict and things that I feel are my duty to remember about my friends and people I lost. But at the same time, I can't remember a lot. I don't know if it's because of the mild TBI or if it's because I had to shut certain things out in order to grow and move forward. I still haven't been able to figure that out, but I remember other things. When I talk to other combat veterans, it all comes back in a flow. But if I can sit here and try and recount all the experiences, maybe a firefight, I can name maybe one or two that are very significant to me. Responding to QRF, Quick Reaction Force, responding to a friend of mine that was blown up inside his Humvee. Those are very prevalent. They're here. My first confirmed kill, that's very prevalent. It's still here. Other things get really hazy, and so I forget things. And I guess it's a part of growing, maybe, or it's my body or our brain learning how to deal and process with things so that you can actually move forward.
I know there are different grades of injuries, but the phrase mild traumatic brain injury just seems like those two words don't belong together.
And you know what? I agree. I think that for classification purposes, the Veterans Administration and all these people that want to give you some sort of classification have come up with levels of how messed up you are. And I think that's the wrong answer. I think if you were involved on any level, you just have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm telling you verbatim is what I'm being told I have.
Right.
Who the heck knows?
Oh, absolutely. No, I know it's the clinical term. It's just it's an interesting to hear those two words together. So was that the end then for you? Did they move you out after your injury? Or?
No.
They kept you in the rotation all the way
yeah,
through?
Oh, yeah. I wasn't missing any limbs. I was still an able-bodied guy. I was rocked out for a little bit, All I saw was a bright flash of light, and everything just went dark for a while. And then we were good, ready to go back and join our brothers in arms. Let's get the job done.
What was it like when you came home?
Oh, man, it was difficult as hell. The civilian world is very undisciplined. There's a lack of discipline everywhere. Everybody's lackadaisical. They don't take their jobs, their life. I felt they don't take anything seriously. And, the little things that people take for granted, I took for granted at one point as well. Being with no running water, being with no hot food, being with no electricity, not being able to cool off when I want to, fan off, and so on and so forth. So, when I came here, I would actually be irate at certain things that people do. Turning off the AC to save electricity. Well, why are you stupid? You might not have electricity one day. You might not have AC, so why not enjoy it? And these are realizations that I came to even while I'm out in Iraq. I said, if I ever come back, I'm turning the heater on, full blast if I'm hot. I'm turning the AC on full blast. Heater on if I'm cold, and I'm turning the AC on full blast if I'm hot. I'm going to buy myself a big steak dinner. I'm not going to give a crap about not being able to afford something later in the future, because what if I'm not around? And if I want it, I'm going to get it now. And that was my mindset. But people here aren't of that mindset. Then I found myself really withdrawn from people. I didn't like to be around people. Sometimes I still don't. But now I am working really hard to represent a group of people and demographics that I feel have been forgotten and left out in the cold. So I kind of force myself to be out there. And I think it's good. It's good for all of us. The nightmares don't stop. The headaches won't stop. The ringing in my ears doesn't stop. The pain in my back doesn't stop. My knees don't stop hurting. There are things that are constant with your time in service. Whether you're injured or not, you still leave the service jacked up in one way or another. And when I got out, I really did end up, that was the cliche, man. I needed alcohol to go to sleep. I drink a fifth of Tanqueray. That was my drink. That was my go-to green bottle, the Tanqueray and tonic drink. I'd have to drink the entire bottle to get smashed and be able to go to sleep. And even then, I'd still wake up at 2, 3 in the morning, low crawling, out of my room into the kitchen only to wake up staring at the clock in the middle of the kitchen. God knows why I would do that. It was just, and at the time I was married, and so my wife at the time witnessed that, and she followed me low crawling to the kitchen. One time I kicked her out of the bed because I was kicking a door in. So we came back with a lot of issues, and I didn't even know there was a VA hospital in Tucson where I resided and grew up in. And so it's a tough journey. By the grace of God, God's been really good to me, and I've had very good people look out for me, veterans that have gone through stuff and said, dude, you need to go see somebody. And so it's hell even getting in to see somebody. But when you do get in, the care is amazing. But the hurdle is there. There's tons of hurdles in life. So it was really difficult adjusting.
How'd you become a very active advocate for veterans? How'd you make that transition?
It started by by going through what I went through, okay? I know what it was like to try and put in, the casino where I lived at the time was doing a grand opening. And so I had drunk away and partied and pissed away my savings, my money, any income. And so the way I had to make ends meet was pretty much going to the casino and lining up behind that promotion where you put in $5 and they'll match your $5. And then I can take those $10 out and I can go and I can buy milk, or I can provide for my son, who was 3 at the time. And I ended up working at the Tucson VA Medical Center and under medical records, of all things. And then as a reservist, I managed to stay in human resources enough to bounce myself into a job into the human resource aspects of the VA. And so I was a functioning alcoholic and working at the Veterans Center when I get a call from HRC Alexandria and some people that I knew. And I became an advocate for veterans for the Army Wounded Warrior Program, AW2, after Walter Reed. And that's how I got to know congressional representatives. And one of those representatives is the person I'm running against. I never would have thought I was going to run against him, but the lack of his support and help for veterans, it was just a slap in the face to anybody that served. And I think it came to a full tilt when I had a soldier with traumatic brain injury, and here we go again with classifications, and severe cranioplasty, missing half their brain, that wouldn't get any assistance on behalf of this guy whatsoever. And that prompted me to get more involved with another representative, Gabrielle Giffords, who eventually ended up getting shot in the head, but she put me on her Veteran Advisory Council. And that's how I got to know what it was like for I got to see a model representative of what I wanted for veterans. And that was my splash, basically, into politics and seeing what difference a congressional representative who really cares can do for veterans. And that was my motivation for getting involved. From there on, we just got involved in the grassroots and climbed the ladder for the past 6 years. And here we are, announcing as a candidate for Congress against the same guy who wouldn't help any of my severely injured soldiers.
That's Congressman Grijalva, correct?
Yes, sir.
So we're having this interview in the spring of 2018, and eventually folks will know how this race turned out. But what I would assume veterans issues, national security issues are the hallmark of your campaign. What specifically would you like to see Congress and the federal government be doing on these fronts?
Okay, I mean, it's the current president is trying to make it easier for us to replace those employees within the federal system that aren't performing. When I was working in human resources, I saw it. It took an act of Congress to fire a federal employee from the Tucson, from any medical center, from the VA. And so I think the approach we need to have is we need to eliminate all those protections that are in place so that we can get the people that really do want to make a difference there. It's really unfortunate that up until this day and age, after being an advocate, after talking to the secretary of the VA and being in touch with all these VISN doctors and directors and the director of the Tucson VA, that I still have to go in circles for me to see somebody to get help. Once I get in, the treatment is amazing. Once again, it's great. But the attitude and the front that's placed and the burden on the veteran to actually get across and get seen is a shame. I think I would fight for not only that, but I would also fight for our little health cards where we can go into our communities and see our doctors and see, a doctor of our preference so that we can get the care that we need when the VA isn't functioning or isn't really pleasant to us. And so we need to do that. We need to work on veterans that file for their disability. The turnaround is better now, but at one point in time, it took 1, 2, 3 years maybe to get a disability claim, and we need to make it easier for them to file and not get harassed. I think a lot of veterans feel threatened once they do receive a disability rating that they have to maintain themselves in a worse state or equally as bad so that they continue to receive their disability rating. There are a lot of things we need to reform within the Veteran Administration system, most definitely.
So the two major bills that have passed so far, would you say those are a good start, or just we need to go just way, way, way farther?
Tell me the two major bills.
Well, they passed one right in the wake of the VA scandal when Secretary Shinseki resigned in 2015, and then they passed another one last year, both of which supposedly gave greater flexibility to fire incompetent employees. But it sounds like you're saying there's still a lot of work to be done here.
There's still a lot of work to be done, and I know they also passed a McSally and McCain bill, which was supposed to give us those health ID cards, and it's just not being pushed forward. It's not being funded. It's not being enforced. We need to go way further. You need to be able to stand up and say, we're not getting this done. I think our current president is pushing in that direction, but we still got a long way to go. A long way to go.
Give folks your website.
My website, it is Arellano for AZ.com, and ARELLANO for number 4 or FORAZ.com. Has a little bio of me there, and I would love any support. Obviously, this is going to be a grassroots effort for sure. The guy's been there for 16 years, but I think it's time that we have someone actually representing their people, representing veterans most definitely, and also being a voice and someone that's got energy to get in here and fight. I've seen battle. I'm ready to do battle again, especially for the people of Arizona and for this nation.
Sergio, thank you so much for your service, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. Sergio Arellano is a veteran of the U.S. Army, veteran of the war in Iraq, where he was injured in an IED blast, now very active in veterans causes, and a candidate for Congress in Arizona's 3rd Congressional District. I'm Greg Corumpus. This is Veterans Chronicles.